Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the cartoonist behind the graphic novel Djeliya, as well as the soon-to-arrive image anthology miniseries Monkey Meat. It's Juni Ba. Thanks for coming on, Juni.
Hello. It's really strange to hear it live. I've had it a bunch of times already.
I've always been told that it's very jarring to hear me switch into the radio voice, where it's just like all of a sudden I'm talking normally and then I'm like this professional or something.
Oh yeah. Well, I grew up with a dad who does that, so I know what it sounds like to the point where at least I could do it when I was a teenager. Like on command, I could imitate that voice.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where he found it actually kind of spooky. So yeah, I'm used to it.
He was on radio?
Yeah, he had I can't get into the details of it because I don't even know what his job is called and it doesn't have a name. And even my sister is 12 and she was asking like, well, what's that job? And I don't know. But basically he would do interviews for the main Senegalese radio. And it was about like very serious business stuff. So he had to be very like calm and serious, and his voice would suddenly change. And my dad doesn't sound like a very serious person.
Mm-hmm. I'm so envious of his abilities. I have a tendency of speaking way too fast when I get excited about stuff. But speaking of being excited, this podcast is dropping on launch week for Monkey Meat. So this is going up the 3rd of January. Monkey Meat number 1 is going up January 5th. You literally just received the comps for the first issue. How are you feeling as we lead up to it?
Do
you get excited?
Yeah, because the thing is, Monkey Meat is a product I've had it in the boxes, I guess, since I was 17.
Yeah.
And it changed like a lot. When the book was announced, I had a friend from high school send me a message saying, "Can you believe that this book that you pestered me about when we were in high school is now actually being made?" So yeah, I have the physical proof of its existence in my hands now, in a form that I am actually satisfied with, which wasn't the case when I was a teenager, which is why I kept changing it.
Does it change things for you having like a physical copy versus having a digital like comic? Does that make a difference to you?
Oh yeah, there's this sense of like it actually exists.
Mm-hmm.
Because looking at the digital copy doesn't change anything from looking at the digital pages that I made. It's kind of the same thing. Whereas looking at the actual printed object, I can it's physically in my hands. It is suddenly very real. I showed it to my cat, and she doesn't care to a level that is quite insane. So I'm very happy, and I have like a friend here who's been waiting for the physical copies to arrive because she really wants to read this series, and she's been waiting this whole time. So I know that I have at least one person that I have to deliver a personal copy to.
I'm sorry your cat didn't care. They have a tendency of not really caring about physical objects in that sense, unless it's like a box they can stand on or stand.
Yeah,
one of the two.
Yeah. By the way, apologies in advance if she starts screaming or something. Like I don't know. Sometimes she does that. I think she's like rehearsing her presidential speech for when she tried to run for president here. So yeah, apologies in advance if there's any screams.
It was very adorable. I assume that she just wanted to see the copy of Monkey Meat number 1. But... Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. You started to draw comics when you were 11, from what I understand, and it all began with Sonic the Hedgehog comics, which I don't know why, but for some reason makes a ton of sense for me. What was it about then for you? Was it like celebrating Sonic, or did you want to make your own comics? Or maybe it was a bit of both.
Okay, so I feel like this is one of those informations that I should not have made public, but I speak before I think sometimes. But basically, the first living room gaming console that I got was a Dreamcast.
Yeah.
And I played Sonic Adventure on that one. And my brain just kind of like, I liked the character. So I started drawing my own Sonic figurines on paper and playing with those. And then I think that the switch to like drawing him narratively, I guess, came when I got the GameCube and Sonic Mega Collection, I think it was called, where there was Sonic CD on it, and I saw the animated intro that Sonic CD had. and I played it on loop because I was just like, the animation of it is insane.
Yeah.
And I that like, even retrospectively looking at it, it explains a lot of why I draw the way that I do. Because, for example, in that video, you can see that his hands are drawn. They're just circles. They don't draw the details of the hands unless he opens them and they have to draw the fingers. When he has when it's a fist, it's literally just a circle.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to go for that kind of style when I draw, like diminishing the level of details as much as I can. So yeah, that video was just like, this is basically, it was kind of like, this is what you can do when you draw something. This is how cool you can make your drawings look. And I don't have the patience for animation. I didn't know how to animate at the time. I was obsessed with cartoons on TV, but I didn't know how to make the thing. And I also was reading a lot of comics. So I guess I went for both the thing that I could do the simplest, but also the thing that I could do myself without having to need too much supplies and help from anyone. Because it's a mix of like wanting to keep control over what I do, which is still something that I have now, and not having to rely on anyone in case they fall short or they're not available when I need them and stuff like that. I even at the time, I had like a tendency to be alone a lot because I prefer to rely on myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you can't open an animation studio by yourself. If you're trying to animate an entire thing by yourself, it would take
Mm-hmm.
forever. But drawing a comic of Sonic, and I do have to say, it's like the hands make sense. I mean, the general angularity of Sonic kind of makes sense as something that would appeal to you, because I don't know why there's like an angularity to your work that
Yeah.
that's going to come up here in a little bit, and also like the energy and motion.
Yeah.
Sonic for some reason in my head feels like when I read that was like the first comic you drew for yourself, everything about it just kind of made sense to me, because it kind of feels like a lot of your interests weaved into one, even though I have zero idea as to how you felt about Sonic the Hedgehog himself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of funny because growing older, like when I was a teenager, I did have that phase of what I call the Final Fantasy phase,
Yeah.
of wanting to add details everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I was extremely upset with myself because I could never draw things that had a lot of details in any way that was convincing to me. It always looked wonky for all kinds of reasons. But also that I realized that I was doing it because I was trying to compete with people who I thought the more details there are, it means that you're a better artist.
Yeah.
And then the older I got, the more self-assured I was. And like the discovery of stuff like Hellboy and other artists who would go for the simple looking designs. And looking back after all that, when I went back and looked at Sonic again, I realized that I had spent most of my childhood liking versions of Sonic that were more modern, that had more detail.
Mm-hmm.
But the older I get, the more I start to like worship the base original design of Sonic, which is literally just two circles and legs. And I just find it so efficient.
Yeah.
And I realized that the Sonic City version is basically that. He's extremely simple. So I still have like a statue of him here because I just like that design so much. Like in terms of like shape, language.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to bring up Mike Mignola here in a second, because I really want, like, Hellboy and Mike Mignola are two things, well, one thing, I guess, in some ways, that I see a lot in your work. But I think it's interesting when you think about somebody like him, too, where you look at his stuff early in his career, and there was, there was a simplicity to it, but there was a lot more detail to it.
Yeah.
But now you look at his current work, and oh my God, I mean, he's trying to be as simple as humanly possible. And I do wonder if, like, the further you get into your art, if you start appreciating that simplicity, both from a speed of doing the work standpoint, but also, and it's like, if you can be that simple and still convey a story really powerfully, it seems like it can be even more potent in terms of the story itself. Is that kind of how you feel and how you've been changing?
Yeah. What I found really impressive, especially with Hellboy when I discovered it, was that it was kind of amazing how there is a sort of weird universality when you draw something with like 3 lines instead of putting all the little details on it. Because like, weirdly enough, it gives so much room to your imagination. And it's not something that you think about when you're reading it.
Right.
But it's sort of just implied, I guess. Your brain just absorbs it and is like, yeah, okay, I can fill in the details myself. And there's also the fact that just my brain tends to like simple designs. I like it when it's streamlined. I like it when I don't know why. Like I don't even have a logical explanation for it. I just know that my brain reacts positively to certain shapes. And the fewer details you have, while still being able to convey the volume and the shape and sometimes even the lighting of something, I my brain reacts with like, yeah, this is impressive. And I don't know why I do that.
It makes sense to me. I think that there's two things. It's like simplicity can simultaneously make it easier to comprehend something, and it can also, like you said, allow you to fill in that detail. I do want to, I'm gonna bring up monkey meat way towards the end and everything, but I do want to point out, like, I really love like the woodland creature version of Thaddeus Lugg's design. It's
Mm,
very simple. It's just black and white, and it's like it's just there's a simplicity to it that has so many different, like, it's weird. It's like I look at that character in the way that you drew him in the first issue, and I just there's like a mix of like sadness but also like wonder to it, and there's not a ton to it. It's I don't know. I mean, I think that's one of the magical things about simplicity is it can contain multitudes in very few lines, and that's
yeah,
tough to do.
yeah. I just wanted him cute.
So I do want to bring up your biggest influences because I think it's an amazing stew of things, but I mean, it also is amazing stew of things that fits perfectly for, your age group. It's, from what I understand, your biggest influences are a combination of Cartoon Network animation, particularly Tartakovsky,
Yeah.
manga, some Jamie Hewlett and Gorillas, and then also Hellboy. But I really want to talk about the Mignola of it all because I feel like that's the one that I see the most in your work, perhaps. I mentioned
Hmm.
angularity. That's a very like Mike Mignola type thing. And also the inks of your art. I feel like I see that. But one thing I really see is like Mike Mignola has specific values as a storyteller that are different than what I think a lot of people value. And I actually see unusual but very good values from you too, like things that I don't see from other people. Like a good example, I was going to bring it up later, but there's this scene when Thaddeus Lug is first introduced, and I believe I forgot what the name of the main monkey that's getting up onto this elephant is, but there's this like character that's driving the elephant, and he says "Sup, Lug," and like
Yeah.
that little beat is something a lot of creators wouldn't put in, but it kind of reminds me of like your equivalent of a woodland creature having an exclamation point over its head, like Mike Mignola or something like that. Anyways, but what is it about Hellboy and Mike's work that just speaks to you both as a creator and as a reader originally?
So I think a lot of it has to do with when I found it. I was exposed to the movie first
Mm-hmm.
on TV one day, completely by chance, and then I completely forgot about it. And when I was 17 or 18, I found a comic on the internet, and I got the first volume delivered to me for Christmas. And I read it a bunch of times, and the original goal for it was just I like the way it's drawn. I want to use it as an example for how I could do things differently, because I was in that phase of reading mostly manga and feeling very inadequate because I could not draw the way they were. And he was sort of like, you can draw in a way that's more streamlined and angular and kind of weird, and it works. So he was kind of like, it's possible, you can do it. But when it comes to like the stories themselves, in the end, the first volume is actually the one that I like the less. It's when I got into all the volumes that have short stories. Those are my favorites.
Yeah.
All the ones that he drew that are stories of like 10, 15 pages, sometimes even less than that. And sometimes they're not even stories really. They're more like events of like he goes somewhere, he punches a beast, and then it's done. But it's all in the atmosphere, the interaction he has with that creature. There's like, it's not something that you come out thinking I learned something or anything, or like the story was about anything. It's more about how it made you feel just being in that moment. It's about the vibe, basically.
Yep.
It's kind of like the same reason why I've been watching Succession for like 3 days, and I don't even really watch it. I just have it in the background when I do other things, and it's all because of the vibe. I like the camera work, the music, the way the characters speak, and everything. And Hellboy kind of works the same way. where I was more interested in what the stories made me feel and what kind of mood they put me in. And of course, you have some stories that have a point and themes and everything, and I like those as well. Like I really like how he makes stories. He has a sense of like he almost feels like he takes folk tales and then gives them a few more details, but keeps that kind of like weird mystery vibe to it. And it so his storytelling is kind of like his art in terms of like there's nothing superfluous about it.
Yeah.
Everything serves a purpose that's not so much explaining anything. It's more about putting you in a vibe. And I like that.
Yeah. It's funny. That is actually one thing I was going to bring up in specific, because both Monkey Meat and Djeliya are told in kind of like almost vignettes rather than constant narratives. It's like there is like the constant narrative to Djeliya, but it's like the folk tales like you're telling about. It's you know, it's getting into the stories that are about their adventures, but also from folklore. And then, Monkey Meat is like an anthology of different experiences on the island. And like, that's another thing that really reminded me of Hellboy is like, it's almost like you like setting up environments to tell tales within your books, more than focusing on like strictly a linear beginning, middle, and end. Even if you end up having those too, it feels like that's like a real influence from Mignola in the sense that it made you realize that you don't have to follow like this very linear path. You can kind of tell the stories that get into the vibes that really appeal to you.
Yeah, that's basically the point. And even like Lug is very much like Hellboy.
Mm-hmm.
He has a lot in common with him, and I think that's also because I needed that gruff kind of rough and tumble kind of character to put in the book. But like the irony of it is that he's the main character of the first issue, and then once you get to the second one, he starts taking more of a back seat. Because, I do have this tendency of like creating For Djeliya, it was kind of the same principle. I tend to create the setting before I create any story.
Mm.
And then it becomes a matter of like, I have those story ideas that I have that are more like concepts. How do I make it fit in Monkey Meat? How do I make it fit in Djeliya? Like Djeliya was a bunch of different ideas. And then it was a matter of how do I make all these ideas form a narrative together that can work, which means that I have a lot of stuff that I never used.
You could do the director's cut later on, the version that has totally blown out with everything.
I mean, I could. I have ideas for a sequel already, so.
I love it. Well, and I actually, one thing I read was that, when you were, being raised in Senegal, it like forced you to really appreciate what you had because you only had one Hellboy volume for a whole year. So you read the hell out of it. I mean, I had comics accessible to me, but at the same time, like there was some comics where you would get, like there was this one Transformers comic I loved. It was Transformers number 41. And I just read the living hell out of it to the point where it's like in tatters, but I have it in like a bag and board over here just so I can, keep it stay in some sort of shape. But I feel like at a certain point, it was almost teaching me comics. It was like a textbook of sorts as much as anything. Is that kind of what that one volume turned into, where it was like, you had that and maybe you had some manga and stuff and you were kind of almost studying it as much as reading it at a certain point?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I have a tendency to appreciate art and stories on two levels, which is either appreciating them for like putting me in the narrative and I kind of forget that it's fake, or I appreciate them for the craft of how it was made and how good the technique is. So I can appreciate something for either one of them or both. And Hellboy I got at first because of the craft, not because I wanted to be particularly in the narrative of it. So once I had read the story, like I said, the first volume didn't really pull me in so much. It only started getting me invested after volume 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I definitely, like, it was one of those books that I had in my bag every day when I went to school. And I would just open it and look at pages and look at how the layout was made, what kind of lighting directions he would use, that kind of thing.
And now, a quick word from one of off-panel sponsors. Macroverse is a next-generation digital comics platform, and one with an astonishing number of comics, with currently over 50 series from over 100 creators on their app, with a 5-star rating both on Apple and Google's app stores. Download the app and binge all their titles, including the Eisner-nominated Remind from Jason Brubaker, Lisa K. Weber's Hex 11, which has been described as Harry Potter meets Blade Runner, or the new queer supernatural adventure series Husk that launches on November 1st. It's just $4.99 a month to subscribe to Macroverse, with proceeds directly supporting the creators on the platform. Keep an eye on the future of Macroverse 2, as 2022 is going to bring an epic upgrade that offers a new level of digital collectability and more, with early adopters able to sign up for more information at macroverse.com. And now, back to the show. I do want to say that one thing I love about your wide range of influences, I feel like, and this is I'm not besmirching any American artists or anything like that, but growing up as an American who is like probably primarily reading superhero comics, it's like you start looking like your influences in a very real way. Like it's like, oh, this person really loved Jim Lee. This person really loved, I don't know, like John Romita Jr., whomever. I feel like with your stuff, because it seems like you kind of glommed on both to whatever comics you could get access to, but also you just kind of read whatever felt right to you. It resulted in your art and approach almost feeling like it has like a fusion of sensibilities. And I mostly bring this up because I've never really seen somebody who is very much influenced by Mike Mignola and manga simultaneously, because it's like I see like your stuff and it's got these Mignola elements to it, but then there's also speed lines like crazy, and I'm just like, it is such a unique and original look to it. But do you feel like having no like one path kind of laid out in front of you allowed you to kind of find something that, I don't know, like I said, is like a fusion of sensibilities, like something that's singularly you? Is that kind of where you feel like you ended up?
Yeah, because like I usually say that I'm the result of like growing up in an African country with media that came from 3 different continents.
Sure.
So I have comics that are made in Europe, in Japan, and in America, and I just the mix of it is like my style just had to be the way it is, because that was kind of inevitable, I guess. The earliest comics that I had were from Belgium and France, and then manga showed up, and then American comics started becoming a big influence when I entered my 20s. And so yeah, the mix was inevitable in that sense of like my brain has like 3 parts, I guess, and they all work together using different pieces of inspirations that came from completely different cultures. So the result of it is the style that you see in the books. But like at some point I stopped looking at it in terms of like mix of influence. It's more a sense of like, I don't really care where that style or element comes from as long as it works.
Yeah.
So mixing Mignola and speedlines just makes sense, because as long as the picture looks good.
It absolutely makes sense, because it's like influences, I feel like, help you form your voice. And then at a certain point, it's all about finding the right answers for what's on the page. And so like when you're working on Monkey Meat, it's not like you're like deploy Mignola self now. It's just like this is the version of you that knows this is the right answer, and it doesn't really matter if these 2 flavors are supposed to make sense together, because they make sense to you.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so you moved to France to go to art school for 4 years, from what I understand.
Yeah.
You grew up with all these like influences and everything like that. You probably had some sort of style at that point. What kind of impact did more formal training have on you? Like, did it help formalize some of the things you were already thinking or feeling about your art, or did it kind of send you in a slightly different path?
I think the track was already pretty well laid out.
Yeah.
What it helped with was the more formal aspect of like learning perspective and anatomy and all that stuff. Like actually having classes to show me how that's supposed to work, which I am not sure I have learned much of anything, because I'm anyway. But the most useful aspect of it was the advice that I got from my uncle, which was, you're going to learn 30% of what you're going to learn. Wait, what was it again? The school is going to teach you 30% of what you need to learn. 70% is stuff that you have to learn by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spend most of my time in libraries and bookshops and buying not just comics, but all kinds of different things. and I would go to one specific teacher at school with like either the books that I just got or the art that I was doing by myself in my room on the weekends. And I can work rather fast, meaning that I could make a comic of like 5 pages in one day, and then show up with it uh, in front of the teacher and just have get feedback on what works and what doesn't. Actually, he was one of he was the first person to really put the finger on you should thrive for simplicity.
Mm.
And he used books to show me, like, if you look at this guy, he used to draw very detailed, but now his style is so streamlined, and that's the natural course of how he evolved. And you can see that progress with a lot of different artists. But you really need to know your basics so that when you streamline things, they don't look weird. Yeah, so he was really influential in that sense of like, aside from the formal aspect, he was more so having someone who could tell me this is working and this is not.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense because, I mean, I imagine that going to France did a number of things for you. One was like having access to people who can kind of tell you, like you said, is this working or is this not? But also it's like, I don't know. I mean, I think like when I was a kid, I wanted to be an artist. And I remember looking at like John Romita Jr. and thinking that detail was everything. Like I needed more energy, more lines, more this, more that. And like if I didn't have that, I didn't have anything. But I imagine hearing a teacher say something like that, it's not that it like permitted you to do that, but it's to know that like that's not, simplicity is not like being lazy. Simplicity is like, can be advantageous from a storytelling standpoint. And then another thing I imagine it did is I imagine you got a lot more access to resources and like different types of art you might not necessarily get access to. Like,
oh yeah,
I read that in an interview last year that you've been kind of looking at JC Leindigger lately, and it's interesting because again, like influences don't dictate everything that you are, but I do think it helps kind of looking at different things to find not influences but inspiration, or like pushes towards like, oh, maybe I could do this a little bit with my art, or maybe like this is a different way you could do things. It doesn't actively influence your art, but like seeing all those different things in France and getting access to all these different things in France probably affected you almost as much as the schooling did in some ways.
Yeah. Oh yes.
I want to talk about the influence, or the influence of the internet, actually, because I know in one interview you did, you mentioned how much watching your one-time collaborator Hassan Otsman El House strip panel naked show on YouTube impacted you. Was the internet in some ways like an addition to your art school experience? Or?
Oh yeah. Actually, most of the writing lessons I have come from YouTube videos about how to make movies, which there are way too many, and not all of them are actually very right. But like it was at least something, and then I could just compare with what I was either watching or reading and figure out what worked for me. In the case of Strip Panel Naked, like that was I was there when the first episode came out, and it was kind of like a godsend, basically, because it was exactly the type of content that I was looking for. Because I was always extremely sad that there was so much about movies on the internet, but so little on actually talking about the craft of making comics,
right?
Of how narration works, how to guide the eye, how lettering and color and all that stuff influence how you read the story. So like that was basically what I needed to guide me in how to be better at what I was doing. And I was still in school at the time. And yeah, the internet kind of made up for the limitations of the teachers that I had. And even aside from that, even aside from teaching me, it also gave me like platforms, because like I would not be here if I hadn't been recommended to go on Twitter a few years ago, because going on Twitter has allowed me to like be in contact with a few people, and then it's snowballed from there.
Is that how you met TKO and Sebastian Gerner?
No, I sent a pitch.
Oh,
Right, rather I sent an email saying I had a pitch, and that's where Twitter was useful. He replied the following day saying, "We don't usually take unsolicited pitches, but we've been looking at we've been watching you for a while, and we want to see what you want to show us."
That is simultaneously creepy and super cool.
Yes, yeah, it was one of those moments of like, oh boy, like people are actually watching me, and it happened. It happened when DC showed up. It happened when Marvel showed up. This whole thing of like, we've been watching you for a while. Like, it's like Agent Smith showing up in your house, except he wants to give you a job.
I don't know if I'd want to work for Agent Smith, but I'm glad that Sebastian reached out. I mean, that's one of the cool things about cool and creepy, I suppose. It's like the internet, for somebody who isn't necessarily going to like American cons or making contacts in like the traditional way. It's like you go on Twitter and you start like, or like, you know, I know a lot of your early comics were online. You start putting that stuff out there, and it's kind of like a business card in some ways. And it also shows you can do the work. And so like it can allow everyone to creep on you from afar and be like, we've been watching you. So it sounds like basically you reached out to TKO. How did Djeliya come out of that? Was it just like that was like something you had available at the time? Did you build it for them? What was it?
No, I had been working on it since I graduated from art school.
Okay.
And originally I wanted to publish it in France, but the usual reaction I got from French publishers was that it was too weird and they didn't know how to market it to the French market, which was their diplomatic way of telling me that it has too many black people in it, basically, which is a whole issue with the whole French publication system. But anyway, and in the meantime, my family kept telling me, you're never going to get the French to actually get what this is. You should go to Americans, because they have been aware of these issues longer, and they actually do more work in that area in terms of making things better. So I sent a message to TKO because my idea was, the main issue that I ran into in France was that all those publishers that I reached out to, aside from one who actually wanted to give the book a shot, but it didn't work out because he wasn't the best collaborator to be with, I guess. But yeah, my basic idea was, the main issue that I ran into in the French system was that they are very used to their... It's not called the old continent for no reason.
Yeah.
And when you say old, it also means set in their ways very much. So when I reached out to an American company, my idea was, I'm going to try and find a company that's young and is susceptible to give me enough money to work on this book without worrying too much. And TKO had existed for like a year when I reached out. And yeah, so I just sent an email that was like, I have this thing, do you want to look at it? And they said yes. And then from there, the process was actually really quick and very efficient. And Sebastian is like apex editor. He's extremely efficient. Like, he's really good. Like, the book would not be the way it is without his input.
Well, I just want to say that having Sebastian as not just your editor, but also like a serious hype man is like a really good thing. I remember when he reached out to me about the book, he was just, I think he actually said it was one of like the 2 best things he's ever edited.
Oh my God.
And yeah, and he loves your stuff a whole lot. And I feel like having somebody like Sebastian in your corner is amazing because I'm sure he's probably mentioned this to you, but he's a very big fan of the comic Berserk.
Yeah.
And he loves it so much, he actually mailed me the first 2 volumes of Berserk just to get me like going on it. I think when he loves a comic, he just wants to tell everyone about it, which also I have to say makes it no surprise that there's a pull quote from Sebastian on Monkey Meat.
Yeah, he like the Monkey Meat actually happened thanks to him. He's the one who was the intermediary with Image.
Really?
Because I like Monkey Meat is a special case in terms of books. Like, we can get into the details of it later, but basically it had to happen at Image. I could not do it anywhere else. It was either me alone or Image Comics, nothing else.
Let's get into it now. I'm going to do a quick spiel about it. Monkey Meat is your new fantasy anthology series that launches this Wednesday, January 5th. I'm going to do the solicit. The Monkey Meat Company made its fortune selling cans of processed meat all around the world. Using that money to fuel their wacky experiments, they turned the native island into a magical hyper-capitalist hellscape where even demons have to pay rent. Follow the lives of the creatures of Monkey Meat Island in this fun, action-packed romp. I've read the first 2 issues. I have all the issues, but I didn't want to go too far into it because I didn't want to just start talking about something in the 5th issue. But I will say the first 2 issues are delightfully different and very, very good. It's an excellent book. It's funny because it's like been described as a follow-up to Djeliya, but you started on it before it, right? Like you said in the beginning that this is something you've been working on for a long time. I guess let's get into that now. Like, how did this come together as an Image book more than a decade later after it started?
Well, the basic idea came because I was listening to Gorillaz way too much when I was a teenager, and my grandfather mentioned eating monkey meat once.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him saying something like, it was actually quite good. And I mean, it was just literally just a few scribbles of like fire coming out of the monkey's head. It's one of the Gorillaz songs. Yep. And I literally just drew a monkey with fire coming out of his head. And from there, it started developing into like a bigger and bigger world because I just kept adding things. Even the fact that you have like this focus on souls and spiritual energy in the book comes from the fact that I was reading a lot of manga and I was really into Shaman King when I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all about that. So yeah, it's a mix of like different things that I just had on my mind at the time. And then, years go by, you learn to draw better, to make better stories. You keep reworking things. And when I was done with Djeliya, the question was, what do I do now? And I wasn't planning on waiting for publishers to reach out to me for anything, because I had spent too much time trying to do that with Djeliya, and it was annoying and I wasted time. So I just figured I'm going to try and work on Monkey Meat and get it done and not wait for anything. The irony was that I started getting more and more work as I was working on Monkey Meat. So I was at one point I was working on 3 different comics at the same time. But yeah, the base concept of it, I guess, is that I wanted to create a world that is fun to be in.
Yeah.
But also very like dystopian, but kind of fun at the same time, where it's humorous. There's humor in it. The characters end up in very weird and wacky situations, but every time you finish a story, you're like, well, that was grim.
Yeah.
But it always has a point. Like, it's not grim just for the sake of it. I try to always have like a theme and kind of not necessarily like make you think or anything, but I try to make sure that the stories are about something. And it had to be with Image because a big point of the concept, the whole miniseries concept, is that it's about overexploitation of people, of resources, of media, of absolutely everything. And something that I am kind of tired of is the overexploitation of stories, where something will come out, say a comic book will come out, and it will start to be developed into all kinds of goodies and movies and TV shows and all that stuff. And after a while, you start to lose the essence or the theme, or you start to lose what made the original story work, and you get an empty product instead. And I didn't want Monkey Meat. Like, I wanted to make a book that's kind of like, no, you're not going to do this with my project. Like, Monkey Meat is specifically designed to never have an adaptation, to never have goodies or anything like that, which is more a test for myself of like, can I have the mental fortitude to say no? Because I've already received a few offers, and I've had to say no. And I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I like. It's more a test for myself, basically, of like, I, as a creator, stick to my morals, I guess, of like, I made this piece of storytelling because I have a few things that I want to do with it, including not fall in the trap of wanting to make more money out of this thing by developing it so much that you lose the thread of what made it good in the first place.
Yeah, I imagine as appealing as like Thaddeus Lug plushie might be, it would be kind of off-brand for the book and also the mission of the book. But it is interesting. It's like you are pretty limited if that's your option because, it's the total list of publishers who, and not to try to like get you in trouble so you don't get work from any of these other publishers, but the total list of publishers who wouldn't look at Monkey Meat as IP to do things with is pretty limited to about Image. And that's, I can see why you would end up there.
Like I pitched it to another publisher before, and the response was that they didn't want to take it because it did not have commercial potential or something like that.
Right.
And my response was almost like, yes, good.
Good. I didn't want to go there anyways.
Yeah. So like the point of it is mostly just to make enough money to keep going. Because like the thing that I want to do is make 5 that come out next year. And then I just want them to make enough money so that I can make 5 more for the following year. And then keep on doing that as long as I want to make stories in that world, basically. Like the comic just has to be able to sustain itself, and that's it.
I'm curious because I feel like this is like 2 different sides of you that actually run into conflict. There's the side of you that's like, I want to do things myself and I want to like, I want to do my thing. And then there's the other side where you love setting up storytelling environments. Is there any part of you that would eventually, let's say like Monkey Meat becomes a gigantic success. It's like, there was that book Ice Cream Man where it was like an anthology where it's like existing within this thing. Would you be interested in seeing other people work within this environment, or is this purely your baby?
Oh no, yeah, I would love that. Like it's a playground.
Yeah.
And it's designed in such a way that it is loose enough that you could do absolutely anything. I have a story in like the assuming the first batch of stories for next year sell enough and I get to make more. I have a story about a Viking that's a mall security guard. And I just do it because I want to, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would love to have like people who have like ideas for things they want to do in that world. You can do pretty much anything. So it's more like I've thought about it. There are a few people who I would love to have because I think their style and their storytelling would be awesome on it. But it's more so a matter that I don't have the money to pay them.
Yeah. You don't want to be like, oh yeah, you can work on Monkey Meat for exposure. I feel like that would be kind of not great.
That would even betray the point of the concept itself.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I can't escape an episode of this podcast without playing an amateur psychologist. But do you feel like is like having fun and like building something you can have joy with working in? I know every comic would be, but a lot of times it's like people are trying to find something that's going to sell a lot or do something like that. It seems to me that like almost everything you do is just about finding joy in making comics. Is that a crazy like overstatement by me, or is that kind of where you're at?
No, that's true, and that's mostly because I've done the thing of working on a project that I did not like. It was a book that had like 200 and some pages. And it was horrible. And I vowed never to do that again.
Yeah.
So I am lucky in that, at least so far, I've been able to say no to the projects that I don't want to work on or that I don't have the time to work on. Of course, it's still a job. So sometimes you have to work on things that you don't want to do because you need the money. And I'm still very aware of that aspect of it. So it's a matter of like balancing how much freedom you have thanks to your bank account being full enough.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you've learned a lot of things that like very veteran artists have told me much later in their careers, very early on, because there's like 2 things you've mentioned already that I feel like kind of comes up with a lot of artists is like the simplicity. It's like you start like drawing, but then I talked to somebody like Chris Somney, and like Chris Somney is all about trying to get to the most simplest form he possibly can. And then another thing is like I've heard so many artists say like the most important thing that they learned was the importance of saying no sometimes. because
Mm.
like there's two things that I think it really does. One, it makes sure that you only end up with the projects that you really well. It can help you end up with the projects you really want, and not like work on things that are going to make you kind of loathe your own work. And then the other thing is like in some ways it's like being able to say no, it kind of makes you more desirable. It's like, oh, you said no to this. It's like, well, we're going to have to find something for him that we really want because you
Yeah.
said no to that. So what is it that he really wants? And now here you are.
The big joke that my friends love to bring up every so often is, well, it's not a joke so much as like just them being very amused, is that when I got approached by DC the first time, I said no.
Yeah.
And mostly because I didn't want to work on the project that they were proposing to me.
Yeah.
So I replied essentially saying I don't want to work on that, but I would love to draw Robin. I have ideas and I have designs. Like let me do the Robin graphic novel that I want to do, or miniseries or whatever. And that's how I got to work on Truth and Justice, because they said we can't give you the book you want to do now, but you can always like try your hand at Robin drawing the Truth and Justice story. And then it led to another Robin story on another book. And so, yeah, that plus the tendency that I have now of posting my pictures or ideas or designs on Twitter. And it has worked enough that I posted designs for Black Panther and the Ninja Turtles. And I ended up working on both.
You're just like willing them into existence.
Kinda, yeah.
And now, a quick word from one of off-panel sponsors. You may have heard of Bad Idea, the experimental comic book publisher that's rolling deep with titles from electric talents like Matt Kint, Mark Russell, Marguerite Sauvage, and more, and doing it with oversized, ad-free, over-the-top releases you can only find at select comic shops around the world. There's no variants, trades, or digital versions either, so if you want one of their big Final 5 releases that are being released throughout the rest of 2021, make sure to visit badideacorp.com to find a comic shop near you or to pre-order a copy online. Do so soon because rumors are saying Bad Idea is over, so this might be your last shot. And now, back to the show. I love it. Well, I mean, it's funny because in some ways, like, I imagine there's some like veteran creators who'd be like, oh, it's a bad idea. But at the same time, it's like, it's kind of like you mentioned earlier, again, creepy, but useful. They're watching you. If you put the idea into their brain that like, hey, I'd really like to draw Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I'm clearly really good at it, as you can see. Next thing you know, you're drawing covers for TMNT. You're doing a story in the upcoming Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles annual. I mean, I think there is, in some ways, a way to will these things to happen, because if you show them that that's something that works, then they understand that it works and makes it you more hireable.
Yeah. Like, and I figured you don't have anything to lose. So even when I make a tweet saying I have an idea for a thing, I can post with like a design to show you what that would look like, but I don't tell you what the idea actually is. So even from the publisher's perspective, I haven't broken any. What would be the word? I haven't broken any rules of like NDAs, potential NDAs. Because like I have not given any information that you would then need to use in your marketing years later if you do decide to make that book. So I just gave you a taste, and it's enough that you know how it could work, and then the publisher just decides if they want to do it or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the Robin stuff you did. It's just like the stuff you posted on Twitter, you could easily just run that as like back matter showing character designs in the future, or run that in an article that goes on like an exclusive reveal on like comicbook.com or whatever, and be like, look at these character designs. Isn't it awesome? I love the fact that you're not just finding success, but it's almost like you're finding success with things you genuinely care about by both willing it into existence, but then also like things with Monkey Meat. It's like you're creating environments that you want to work within. I imagine that's like, I'm not saying that other ways are not healthy, but it seems like a really good way to maintain a positive relationship with the art form.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, my brain does not stop. It's always like working on something, and very often it tends to work on worlds. So even when I'm working on, say, Robin, the story idea I have, the one that I have pitched on Twitter a few days ago, I ideas and a whole folder of references for what Gotham would look like.
Mm.
And it's a weird mix of like Brussels architecture and old German expressionist type stuff. And like I've already started thinking about what it would look like because my brain just doesn't want to stop. So when I have to instead work on things that I'm not interested in, it's a pain. Like it physically hurts. And I don't like the result of the stuff that I'm working on because I don't want to work on it, and you can tell. And I'm disappointed with myself, and I need a certain level of. I take great satisfaction in my work. It's very important in terms of like making me mentally stable, I guess. Not in terms of like selling it, but just being satisfied with the stuff that I draw, just the object itself. So if I spend too much time working on things that I don't enjoy, I start like it's kind of like a flower dying.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's actually it's self-care, you might say,
Yeah.
to be very intransigent in terms of what I want to work on, and I need to be passionate about the things. So right now I'm lucky enough that when I have an idea for something, I can pitch it, and so far it's worked out pretty well. So hopefully that keeps on going this way.
Is there like a balance there though, where it's like your brain is always going and always wanted to build these things, but you also have a lot of things you know are doing and can be doing. Like, do you try to not push your like for that Robin pitch? I'm not saying it's not going to happen or anything like that, but I mean, do you not want to go too far down that path just in case it doesn't happen, or is it just like you got to go wherever your brain takes you because that's where your passion lies?
I go wherever my brain takes me.
I love it.
When I first made it was last year, and I think it was last year when I first started working on it, and I spent like a good week or two just writing and drawing stuff, with the full understanding that it may never happen, but I still had to get it out.
Yeah.
And that's how it works with a lot of stuff that I do. Like the next book that I want to do that's all mine is a post-apocalyptic story about Captain Nemo being the last human living on Earth.
That's
and
awesome.
I've already like I'm supposed to like repost a few drawings on Twitter actually, because like I've made the world, I've made the design of the Nautilus to Captain Nemo and the machines and everything. The story is already made. Now it's more a matter of finding which publisher is going to take it, but I have like this notebook in my bag that I carry everywhere, and so my brain is just naturally like this. Djeliya was the same thing. I just work constantly. Most of the TMNT annual was drawn in bars, which I don't know if that's going to tarnish IDW's image or anything, but like my friends and I go out, or they work at a bookshop, which is where I spend most of my days. So most of the time I'm outside of my home, but I'm working wherever I am because my brain just doesn't stop.
So does that mean I presume that means you work traditionally, unless you're lugging like a Cintiq or something to the bar? You do?
It's an iPad. It's an iPad.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Okay, well let's get back into Monkey Meat a bit. I do want to ask, like, how much. So you were doing all this stuff a while ago in regards to building up the idea of Monkey Meat. Did any of that original work make it into the first issue, or was that just like kind of conceptual work?
Conceptual.
Okay.
The oldest design you're gonna find is either, well, actually no, like Lug was designed when I was in high school.
Like Big Lug?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he changed so much that's how you end up with the last page, actually. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I could never land on an actual design. So I was just like, you know what, I'm going to use every one of them. I just need an excuse for like how I'm going to do it. And other than him, the 5th issue is focused on a character that I also drew when I was in high school. Which I ended up using as one of the comics that I made when I graduated. It was one of the comics that I drew for the last year of art school, one of the projects that I had to do to get my diploma. So yeah, like even then.
Yeah. You brought up character design, and that's one thing I think is really interesting. Like, I love the design of, I don't even does like Eriko's does his like evolved self, like the one who's drink some had some soul juice, does he have like a character name beyond just him, like just his actual name? I don't think he
No.
does. I think it's just Eriko.
Yeah.
Like I love that design, and it feels very. If it's funny, it reminds me of, simultaneously of like manga, and then also like I was really into like the screamo scene when I was like in like the early 2000s when I was in like college and everything. And it reminds me of
Yeah.
like something like My Chemical Romance, almost like that.
Yeah.
I am interested in like what goes into character design for you. Like, is that a big part of the series? Trying to
Oh
like,
yeah.
it seems like each issue has a kind of a distinct character focus. Is that something you're really trying to distinguish because like that almost dictates the type of story it's going to be?
Yeah. I also tend to change the visual style at least a little bit with every story,
Mm-hmm.
uh, depending on what the tone is supposed to be. And in the case of Aiko, the whole point of him was he is that kind of cringy teenager who's very angsty and annoying, but he thinks he's really cool because he dresses like those characters in anime that he thinks are really cool.
Yeah.
And so like he's the manifestation of my own teenage angst from when I was a teen, but like taken to a level of like insane violence and anger. Or like he's basically like I when I was working on him, I told my friends he's basically what I could have been if I hadn't had the friends that I had when I was that age, like 15, 14. He's the result of like being so isolated while at the same time consuming media that sells you an idea that you, the isolated person, are some kind of special archetype that everyone is going to understand how great you are. And like he's very very much based on like Sasuke and Naruto from the Naruto manga, of like the kid on his swing who everyone hates, who turns out to be the sweetest boy that everyone ends up loving.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, in real life, you have so many stories of kids who grow up like that, but they have so much trauma and anger pent up that they end up doing horrible things. And like America is a good example because you have all these school shooter situations, and a lot of the time, there's the excuse of like he had a bad day, or they have this entitlement of like I was supposed to get this kind of attention and I never got it, so society has to pay, like that kind of extreme reaction to feeling as isolated from the world. So yeah, and so in terms of design, he was basically just let me take the aesthetics of all these anime manga characters who I was sold as like the really cool guy, but put them on a character who is so messed up.
Yeah. And still sees himself as the hero, even
Yeah,
though he's destroyed a decent portion of the island.
yeah,
I guess spoilers for Monkey Meat number 2. Apologies. Yeah, it's really interesting to see these characters. It was funny because I read that Awa and Prince Mansoor were both like built off yourself. So I was curious. I hate to say it, but there's a part of me that felt like Eriko in number 2 had to be at least to a certain degree you, because it felt so real. like
yeah,
like
yeah,
is that something that kind of goes into all your characters? Is like a
yeah.
different aspect of yourself?
Oh yeah, definitely. And like the second issue of Monkey Meat was the most complicated one in terms of like being honest with myself,
Mm,
because this is not a good person.
right.
This is me taking all the worst aspects of myself and of figures that I've seen in the news and stuff, and putting them in one character and trying to really put myself back in the mindset of how how do I take the person that I was when I was a teenager and I had all these issues, and how do I extrapolate from that to get to understanding how you get to the kind of person who can show up in a public event and shoot people. And not that I was ever going to shoot anyone, that
Right.
was never going to happen, but it's more like I understand I understand how you can get from one to the other if you have an environment that doesn't stop you from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And or you just like, I don't know, mentally ill or something, which I don't like using as an excuse, because you can be mentally ill. It doesn't mean that you're gonna shoot people.
Right.
But anyway, yeah. So basically, this idea was I put of myself in every character that I make. Like the third issue of Monkey Meat is very much based on a very specific moment of my life, but you would not know unless I told you.
Right.
To the point where the main character actually has my face, which, like, again, I think my therapist would be very interested in. But yeah, so I do put a lot of myself in characters.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I don't know. The anthology element is such a fascinating thing because there's always been this idea that like anthologies don't work in they don't work in direct market comics. But the thing for me is like I always find anthologies to be really fascinating reads if done right. And one of the things I love the most about it is like I feel like it kind of like Monkey Meat leans into the idea of the like, you know, Gotham being the main character of the story, or like the city being the main character of the story. It's like all these, you know, all the Lug and Eriko and all the other characters are like the focus characters. But it does seem like, I don't know. I mean, it's the whole idea with the anthology is that you just wanted to use the island as a framework to kind of look at different things that could happen in one big crazy world. Was that just the idea of why you wanted to do it as an anthology instead of just a serialized narrative?
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of it comes from the fact that I could never settle on an actual story for this.
Sure.
So I just ended up thinking, you know what, you could just do all of them.
Yeah.
And it became a playground where I can just have an idea, and it doesn't, like, especially if it's an idea for a story that's just like, say, 5 pages long. And I don't have to worry about how I'm gonna turn it into an actual full series or anything. I can just be like, okay, I'm gonna craft this to fit into the Monkey Meat universe, and I just have to make it fit in that world. Which, again, because the world is so loose, I don't really need to do much of anything. It can welcome all kinds of different stories, and yeah, so it was designed to be extremely flexible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. I don't know. It's interesting because it also allows you to kind of hit with so many different tones, because it's like the second issue is simultaneously like big explosive action, but also like, I don't know, satire for any number of things. Like the people, I don't want to get into spoilers, but I will say one thing that's a very minor spoiler is that you have like a Doctor Strangelove reference in there. And I feel like that's a very apt reference for the enthusiastic and entertaining take to a very dystopian world. It's just like it's a very dark thing, but it's also having fun while doing it. And I like the fact that this environment allows you to have wildly different tones in each issue, and it still works, but also within the issues. Like, that's one thing I really like about the first issue. I don't know why, but sad comics have really started to appeal to me a lot as I get older. But there's like a sadness to Lug's story. Like, he just doesn't want to break things anymore. And I think despite the fact that it is a very entertaining issue, it's also got like this sadness to the character himself. There's a tragedy to Lug, and I like that you get to explore all these different tones within one book.
Yeah, I was told by a friend a few years ago that I am way too mean to my characters because they tend to like that. It is true. Like, a lot of the stories that I write, I'm kind of scared because Djeliya had a very upbeat ending.
Mm-hmm.
And like, people praised it for that, and now I'm scared because I'm like, that's not actually what I do usually.
You've created the expectation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, again, my therapist would have a lot to say about this, but I think it's like, because so much of what I write comes from my brain and how I think about either myself or other people, there is a level of like sadness and hurt that comes with a lot of what I write. So. Right. And so Monkey Meat is like, it's the perfect like outlet for this, because I can simultaneously make fun of everything in the world that annoys me, while at the same time being very serious about the fact that this is not funny. and so every ending is like, yeah, but this is sad actually. This is horrible.
Yeah. Okay, the last thing I want to ask about Monkey Meat was, you know, Djeliya, you worked with your advocate / editor Sebastian Gerner. Monkey Meat, you didn't have one, or at least to my knowledge. I don't know. Maybe Sebastian. What's that?
I didn't.
You didn't. Does that change things for you? Because, I mean, one of the things I know that people say about working on an image book is you're very much on an island. Like you're a small
Yeah.
business, you're running your own thing. Did that change things for you, or is that just something you're comfortable with?
I have realized that I prefer to have an editor who tells me everything I'm doing wrong. Uh, which was what was nice with Sebastian, because like you had all the praise every time you sent something, but you also had the list of everything that you need to change.
Right.
So I want to have editors that I can send my pages to tell me what's working and what isn't. Uh, but Monkey Meat is the one exception. I have considered it. The main reason why I didn't do it was money again. But I also took that as sort of a, like you were using the image of the island. In the case of Monkey Meat, it was an island on purpose. Of like I'm gonna have editors on everything else I'm gonna work on, at least for the foreseeable future, because I'm gonna be working with all kinds of different people and companies and stuff. So they have editors. For Monkey Meat, I enjoyed being able to just do whatever I wanted and not have to worry about the back and forth of showing it to other people, getting the green light and everything. I could just, like, it was freeing to be able to just make my story the way I want it to be, show it to my friends, either in the comic book business or outside of it, just to have a feedback of this is working and this is not. But that was it. I didn't want or need an editor on this one. I enjoyed being able to go back to the sort of freedom that I had when I was a teenager, and no one looked at what I was doing.
Yeah. I love the fact that, I don't know, it's always interesting to see what somebody comes up with when they're working on something as a cartoonist, because you're writing this, you're drawing this, you're lettering it, you're coloring it, you're doing everything. And so it's completely you. And I guess, like, Jillia was that as well. But in some ways, this is almost, because you don't have like Sebastian's input, this is so purely you. It makes it really interesting, both for readers and for your therapist, apparently. Working off of that, so you, like you said, you did the Truth and Justice #6 issue with Damian Wayne. Sounds like you have more stuff coming down that path. You have the TMNT annual coming. Is there, given that you've had so much freedom so far and you've kind of been able to do what you want, do you feel like working within the parameters of, like, I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this. Let's just say, like, the usual process of making comics. Does that feel restrictive, or do you find your own freedoms within that?
It kind of is, but it's one of those situations where you go into it knowing what it's going to be like. So it's not like you can act surprised,
Right.
like oh my god, there's so much creative restrictions. I didn't know this. Well, yes, I did. Like so I'm not surprised by anything. Which is also why I am all the more tempted. Well, not tempted, but like all the more decisive about saying no whenever a publisher contacts me to work on something that I'm not interested in.
Right.
Because I don't want to go through that process for something that I don't care about. Now, that said, it hasn't been like a difficult or painful experience at all. It was actually more streamlined than I was expecting it to be, at least for now. I think part of it is also that I haven't worked on like really big books with a lot riding on them.
Right.
So far, I've been given short stories here and there, which is actually what I enjoy doing. I think I've already found a lane in which I am pretty happy, which is working on my own, creator-owned stuff on my own time, and being the artist you get on licensed stuff because he wants to do it and he would be good on this or that character, and he does it like to pay the bills and everything, but also because he actually cares about whichever project he's working on. Kind of like, and most of all, you get him because you want his specific style and the way he draws. Kind of like when you call Tradmo to work on something, you know what you're gonna get. You don't get him on anything because he wouldn't necessarily work on anything. You call him for specific things, and you end up with Silver Surfer Black, and everyone is like, "Oh my god!" So that's kind of what I am trying to get into like I enjoyed 2021 because I was working on Monkey Meat and doing covers for various publishers, and every once in a while one of them was like, we have this short story, do you want to do it? And I say yes, and I have fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's kind of the dream, right? Is like do your own thing, but also like you can find work like covers. I actually think covers for a lot of artists can be a I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just like it's a good thing for artists to have in their back pocket if they can get cover work, because it's not as time consuming as like drawing a full issue, but it pays pretty well, and it's enough to like kind of float you as you're doing your other stuff. But then also it's like being able to kind of dive into things that actually mean something to you, like TMNT or like Robin and things like that. That strikes me as super important because it pays the bills, but also it allows you to work on something you actually care about. Because after talking to you for about an hour and 20 minutes now, you don't strike me as the type of person who would be very good at faking it if you really, if you didn't like doing it. So that seems like it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to make it seem like you've got everything figured out, but it feels like you've got, to a certain degree, you really have a good sense of what you want to do with comics and how to do it.
Yeah. Most of all, like I enjoy being able to stay in my bubble and work on my stories. Basically, like I'm trying to do this in a way that's as calm and chill and non-stressing as possible. Someone on Twitter yesterday, I think, said that that my vibe was chill with a hint of unhinged. And I added it to my Twitter bio because I freaking love it, and I find it kind of accurate. Like,
yeah.
I want to be in a bubble where I'm comfortable and I don't have to stress too much, and I get to work on the stuff that I want to work on and be unhinged in those things.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're accomplishing that, and I think you're finding joy while doing it, which is the perfect blend. But Juni, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Monkey Meat and your entire career. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Juni Ba. You can find him on Twitter at Juni_Ba, on Instagram at Juni.Ba, and his work in the upcoming series Monkey Meat. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content, and its members-only forum. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Patrick Coyle, Devin Fitzsimons, Joshua Corlett, Nick Walker, Isaac Warren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narbs Studios Comics, Nicholas Palmieri, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Van de Ven, Brian, Submit Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Lou, Scott Hazelwood, Scott Buwan, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductorTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Demetriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comic Star in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.